Hello, everybody. The music is going down, so I think that's a signal that we're about ready to begin this morning's session. And this morning, our session is on aging and long-term care. And we have three of probably the most knowledgeable people on that topic here on the stage. And we'll be letting them introduce themselves shortly. Just a quick housekeeping thing. I want to go through some objectives. We have objectives for today's session. The first objective is the audience should be able to identify issues that will challenge our ability to finance long-term care in the U.S. in the coming years. And secondly, gain an appreciation from a consumer perspective of the challenges specifically related to financing long-term care through traditional and hybrid insurance. And thirdly, examine issues related to state-funded long-term care insurance programs. So with that, I will turn this over to Brenda Coode.
Good morning, everyone. I am Brenda Coode. I'm a longtime NAIC consumer representative. In my day job, I'm a retired college professor, but in a College of Family and Consumer Sciences. So my perspective is thinking about what consumers know, think, and do when it comes to money in terms of financial literacy, but more specifically here for this focus, what they know, think, and do when it comes to insurance. And as you all know, there are many, many issues related to the aging of our population and insurance, and certainly one of those is long-term care. So I'm chairing this panel. We have two people, as you can see. Bonnie Burns has probably talked to more people about senior insurance issues than certainly anyone that I know, and has a lot of expertise working with consumers, with organizations, with policymakers, and was a part of the NAIC Consumer Participation Program from the beginning and continues to actively participate. Dick Weber is a certified financial planner who has expertise in a range of products that are typically offered to prepare for long-term care, and also an NAIC consumer representative. So I'm privileged to work with both of these people through our work at NAIC. Just to set a little bit of background, so probably everyone in this room has some knowledge of this, but simply because of the aging of our population, we're seeing an increasing demand for long-term care, but it's also true among younger people as we have more health conditions that affect people's health and ability to manage on their own. And we're also seeing increasing demand for different types of care in different settings. So that's creating some challenges as well. At the same time, we're seeing a decreasing supply of paid caregivers, in part because wages are insufficient. I suspect the experiences of the pandemic also meant fewer people were interested in being caregivers at this point in time. And in the absence of paid caregivers, families, especially women, are having to step up and fill in this gap, creating stress and economic uncertainty. According to one survey I saw, caregivers spend an average of 22 hours a week in caregiving. That might not be direct caregiving, but managing caregiving. And how do you have a productive full-time job that advances your career if you're spending that much time on caregiving? So there are a number of issues related here, and I'll just add to that surveys show that people would prefer to be paid, would prefer to be cared for by their families, but they also say they haven't talked about it with their families. So I think there are a lot of issues that might be present here that we want to think about. So Bonnie, what would you say to each of us about thinking about what you need when it comes to long-term care?
Well, a lot of the people that I talk to about long-term care are in the beginning of the planning process and thinking about how to pay for that kind of care rather than thinking about what that kind of care will mean to them later in life. So one of the things that I talk to them about is all of the issues around being in a place where you actually do need care. because that influences a lot of decisions later on. So paying for long-term care is on the top of a lot of people's minds, but how that care actually occurs is a really different situation, because they may not have the decision-making of their own to apply to their need for care. They may not live in the same place. When people are buying long-term care, they live in a particular place and they think about getting care where they live. That may be very different for them 10, 15, 20 years from now when they do need that kind of care. They may not have the same spouse or any spouse when they need care. Their children's lives may have moved on in a way that doesn't facilitate their ability to get care from their children. Or their children may have predeceased them, which we see happen a lot, and they may not have even had children, so they have no one to provide the kind of care that they had envisioned. So there are a lot of changes that take place from the time a person first starts thinking about needing care to the point where they then do need care, and who makes those decisions, where they'll live, who it is that will take care of them, and a lot of other issues involved in that as well. All of us want to be taken, have our care given to us in our own home. Whether or not that's possible 10, 15, 20 years from now is an open question. And that's what a lot of people need to be thinking about in terms of both any insurance they're trying to buy, but also what that means to them in their personal life when they do need care. So those are a lot of the topics that people have to consider in the whole process of needing care.
So, of course, one of the questions was on Bonnie's slide is how do you pay for long-term care? And just looking at two sort of extreme options. So hopefully everyone in this room knows that Medicare doesn't really pay for long-term care, 100 days of skilled nursing care under certain conditions. But large percentages of the population in surveys say, when asked, how will you pay for your long-term care? They respond, Medicare will pay for it. And the most disturbing survey results I see is when more than half of people over 65 think Medicare will pay for long-term care. As an educator, I know you don't pay attention to things until you need to. Well, if you're over 65, you probably should know what Medicare does and doesn't do. Traditionally, Medicaid has paid the majority or a larger percentage of long-term care expenses, but we're seeing significant concerns about whether Medicaid funding will continue to be available at the level that it has been in the past. In addition, as some of you probably already know, Medicaid requires a spend down, and some people don't know that and won't want to do that. I think Medicaid is often associated with giving up choices, accepting lower quality care. So there's lots of reasons why people who think they have options may not look at Medicaid as one of those choices. At the same time, at the far other end of the spectrum, we're seeing significant numbers of people accumulating personal assets. I keep reading about 401k millionaires, people who have contributed to their 401k, had an employer match, were able to participate in the increase in value of equity assets, so they invested in stock mutual funds or whatever in their 401k, and now they have a lot of money in their 401k. They probably aren't remembering the tax hit that they'll take when they take that money out, but we may have a part of our population that will have personal assets that they could use to pay insurance premiums, or to pay for their own long-term care. But what about the people in the middle? You know, that's probably where most of our population would be. Not eligible for Medicaid, not 401k millionaires, somewhere in the middle. And how do we help them to manage their long-term care needs? And one of the questions we'll be asking today is our state-funded programs a solution for at least some people in the middle? So, Bonnie, is this problem going to solve itself, or do you think it's just going to get worse?
Well, this slide is meant to show the compounding effect of aging on our population in this country. People have known that the baby boomers, a very large population, were aging for years and have done nothing to help with the cost of long-term care. But the baby boomers aren't the only population we need to worry about, because while they're going to be turning 85, start turning 85 in 2031, Generation X starts turning 65, feeding into that same population. By 2041, we've got first Gen X turning 75 at the same time that baby boomers are turning 85. And as most people know, people in their 80s, that's when long-term care begins to be a problem and people need care in that decade of life or later. To compound that is the millennium generation, because that's an even larger group of people than baby boomers. And with longevity being what it is today, this compounding effect of all of these generations moving into these aging decades means that we're going to have way more people who are older in our population as we go forward. And those people are going to begin to need care. And as they need care, there are going to be more and more of them needing care. And as you can see from this slide, there are a lot of percentages here that show an increasing number of people moving into the decades of life when they're going to need care. And because we don't have any system for paying for that kind of care, the burden has fallen on families. And last year, this country received $85 billion in uncompensated care by family members to their family members who needed care. Our Medicaid population in the states is expanding at the same time that we're cutting Medicaid resources. We don't have a way now to provide care for large numbers of people who need it, and this is only going to get worse in the decades coming before us. So no, we don't have a system for paying for this kind of care, and the middle population is the population that suffers the most from this, because they deplete resources and ultimately can end up on our state Medicaid programs. This is a slide I use whenever I talk about long-term care. It affects so many aspects of life, and for women, it affects a lot of their life, from the time that their grandchildren, who may be providing care to a grandparent, to the woman in the middle who has children at home with a family member who needs care, to the older daughter who's caring for an even older mother. This affects every aspect of life. It affects employment and employers. It affects our state Medicaid program. It affects all of the lives of the families that have a family member who needs care. So we have not done anything towards solving this problem. And as it gets larger, over the coming years, it's going to get a lot more pressing issue about how we take care of large numbers of elderly people who need care. The Medicaid program in the last few years has been expanding in a way to provide more care at home rather than care in an institution. And more people have become eligible for the program over the years as they've aged and used their resources. But that is not going to keep up with the demand that's coming in the future. There's going to have to be a lot more work done at the social level to figure out how we're going to take care of large numbers of people who need care and how we're going to pay for it.
So, Dick, as a certified financial planner who thinks about what things cost, as well as how to use various financial products to prepare for those costs, offer some of your perspectives on this, please.
Thank you, Brenda. One of the things that I have in my background of almost 60 years in the life insurance industry is I did work with clients for many years, and long-term care insurance was an issue. What I discovered more than anything else is that old phrase, denial is not just a river in Egypt. Most of the people that I spoke with recognized conceptually that there could be a problem of need for long-term care, but it wouldn't happen to me. I bought my, what I call original flavor long-term care policy in my 50s. And fortunately, it was short-term, but I have been in a skilled nursing facility. And what I noticed was that the effect on my wife was enormous. Even though she wasn't taking care of me, she was managing the long-term care facility's care of me. And that was an enormous chore. And just imagine if she had had primary responsibility as opposed to having the facility. As Brenda indicated, I'm sure you all know, Medicare is not designed and does not cover the things that we normally think about of long-term care. That is something that, as we've been talking about and will continue to talk about, is an issue of how do I get the services I need when I need them. And the fact of the matter is, at least statistically, 70% of us will at some point need what we call long-term care. We'll define that in just a second. I love this quote: "We aren't living longer, we're dying more slowly." And I think that that's a really important thing to bear in mind as we age. I say to my wife, "Why didn't our parents warn us?" And she says, "Would you have listened if they had?" And I have to say, no, of course not. So that's the beginning of this part of the discussion of long-term care. We are going to need services. And we're talking about long-term care as the things that we will need in the aging process. We'll also distinguish what we call long-term care I, which is insurance as one of the ways that long-term care services can be paid for. You're probably all familiar with the 6 activities of daily living. You have to not be able to perform at least 2 of those in order to be eligible for long-term care services, to be needing those services. And then, not coincidentally, if you do have insurance, that's when insurance will begin kicking in after a waiting period of having at least 2 of the activities of daily living impairment or cognitive impairment, and really has to be said, significant cognitive impairment. As we get older, we forget names, we forget words. That's not cognitive impairment for purposes of eligibility for long-term care services and insurance. Half of those who require long-term care will have some of these high intensity, that's what the ADLs are, high intensity issues. The other half, as we've been talking about, are going to rely on family and friends for care, which is good in the short term, not so good in the long term. We were talking earlier about 125 years ago, families lived together. You saw multiple generations, if not in the same house, in the same building or very nearby. The interstate system in the mid-50s kind of destroyed all that. We're much more distributed around the country. And so that isn't as available, as Bonnie referred to, any longer. When we talk about what it costs, it's really important to understand the median cost for a home health aide, and this is a limited number of hours per week. It can be $5,000 a month. And the cost of skilled nursing care can be as high as $25,000 a month. And these numbers start to get so large that it's easy to say, again, that won't happen to me. But it's something that we have to recognize. The costs are enormous, and it's one of the scariest things about the statistics that Bonnie talked about, because there are so many people who are entering this phase. I am just about to be 80, entering that phase where I have to be thinking about how will I best receive those services I'm most likely to need. Thanks. So one of the things that comes up is, if you don't have insurance, how do I pay for this? And when I was working with clients, the most often thing I heard, a financial planner likes to work with people who have a reasonable amount of money. So the typical net worth is between $2 and $5 million. And the most often thing that I would hear from a client when I started talking about what were their concerns about the risk of needing long-term care services, the most frequent answer was, won't be a problem, we have plenty of money, we can pay for that out of pocket. And so back then, and then more recently, I did a little spreadsheet. And I said, let's start with $2.5 million. And let's assume that we earn on average, we get more conservative as we get older, let's assume we earn 4%. And so on $2,500,000, that's $100,000 a year. But what if you're paying for skilled nursing at $250,000 a year? You have to pay taxes on what you're earning from your capital. You have to pay for long-term care. $2.5 million will last just 8 years until that is entirely gone. And we haven't considered, what about the spouse who doesn't need long-term care? What will she or he live on? $3 million will dissipate to zero in 9 years. $5 million will dissipate to zero in 13 years. So paying for long-term care, especially the really expensive kind, the nursing care, skilled nursing care, dissipates assets very quickly. So that's something we want to be very careful of.
Could I just add
Yes.
a point that complicates this, and that is the bequest motive. So people who really are still motivated by wanting to leave some significant part of that pot of gold to subsequent generations, even though subsequent generations may not even really be thinking that way anymore, but that just complicates the whole decision that people have to make.
That's a really good point. So this is what leads to the issues of alternatives, family care, using existing assets to the extent that you can. Here's where the I comes in to LTCI, one of the ways that we can pay for these services. So we came up with a infographic, if you will, that I think is a useful way to visualize the various ways that insurance can help fund long-term care, starting with what I call original flavor long-term care, that independent policy that just covers long-term care. When you meet the 2 ADLs or the significant cognitive impairment, there's a waiting period, 60 to 90 days, and then you begin to receive benefits. Those policies were very popular when they first came out in the 1980s. There has been an almost 90% reduction in the number of new policies of that type purchased over the last 30 years. So far fewer are being purchased today, and there are far fewer carriers who are offering that original flavor type of insurance. So what has come about is what is called hybrid long-term care. And this infographic sort of takes us from the pure traditional long-term care coming down the semicircle to life insurance as a way of funding legacies, and how we can use life insurance contracts with riders, if you will, typically riders, that will allow for a long-term care component. A recent study by the TIAA Institute found that only about 14% of people age 60 or over have private long-term care insurance. So 70% are going to need long-term care services, only 14% have acquired insurance. There's a big disconnect there. The declining sales of traditional policies has allowed for this hybrid type of product development to occur, but there's some things that we really need to be very careful about, and that is something that concerns Bonnie and me. The most popular form of life insurance being sold today is called indexed universal life. Put it in context of just general universal life, which is a type of policy that doesn't have a specified premium. These policies, certainly there's whole life, there's indexed universal life, there's variable universal life, again, original flavor universal life. Even term insurance can have riders that provide a long-term care component. This is great. But what happens if the life insurance policy itself terminates? We have a very scary statistic that among universal life policies in general, 88% fail to terminate as a death benefit. If it doesn't terminate as a death benefit, it terminates sometime before death. And if it is associated with a long-term care rider, what happens to the long-term care? Presently, if the underlying life insurance policy lapses, so does the long-term care. That is a huge issue that we need to find a solution for. We need to find, probably needs to be a regulated solution where there is a conversion or some other means by which that long-term care component of the insurance can be continued even if the underlying policy were to lapse. Just a very quick statistic, 2019 was the last reporting year. The long-term care insurance industry reported losses that year of $2.3 billion. So insurance has been problematic, certainly in the original flavor policies. If any of you have owned policies or have family members who've owned them, we've seen premiums double and triple and quadruple again because of mispricing at the beginning. And so it's gotten a bad reputation, which is another thing that has led to the development of these hybrid policies. Again, all forms of life insurance, including term insurance, can have these components. But what happens or should happen if those policies themselves lapse? So the thing that we want you to know about the long-term care, the big I, the insurance, is that whether it's standalone policies, what I call original flavor, whether it's hybrids, these can be very useful, but there's more work to be done to protect the consumer so that they have, if they choose insurance as the way to fund their long-term care needs, that they have options that they can live with.
So, Dick, one of the underlying problems with this type of care is the actuarial assumptions that are used to produce an insurance product. And the traditional policies failed in large part because of those actuarial assumptions that were incorrect at the time and resulted in huge rate increases, which is why many companies have gotten out of that market and why so few of those kinds of policies have been sold since then. But that issue underlies all these other products as well, is the actuarial assumptions are not correct or not adjusted over time, then those products are likely to fail sometime in the future too. So what this points out is the regulatory role for long-term care insurance of any kind, and the model that has been developed to regulate those products is insufficient to meet the need for the products that have evolved over time that are not captured in that model.
Right.
So we've just heard Bonnie say one thing that's needed, and that is to, look at the regulations that are guiding what's happening in this market. But what about some other, or more about that, or even but other ways that we can make sure that long-term care insurance actually meets consumers' needs? And I don't know which one of you wants to start.
Bonnie, why don't you start?
Well, I mean, that's the regulator's role through the rules in a particular state to protect consumers. And I would argue that the current model that states are basing their laws on are not sufficient to do that in the current market, because these products have evolved in so many different ways. Even the industry doesn't know what to call them. So we call them hybrids, and that term encapsulates huge numbers of variations of products that fall between the cracks of the existing model. So that's one of the issues, is that state regulators have to have the authority to regulate these products, but they also have to pay attention to the fact that there are some consumer issues out there that need to be addressed as well. Even the agents selling these products often don't know how they work, and if they don't know, they can't explain it to their clients.
Bonnie, one of the things that occurs to me is fundamentally, if you look at the Affordable Care Act and the realization that everyone had to be covered, both the healthy and the unhealthy, in order to make the financing of health care affordable. That same dynamic exists with long-term care. 70% of us are at some point going to need services. Maybe it can be filled by family, maybe it can be filled out of current assets, but insurance is the most likely way to be able to make sure that most people have the services they need. And if we're going to do that, it has to be built on a structure where most people are contributing to some kind of plan so that it is ultimately affordable.
Well, that's what the state of Washington did with their unique plan to cover long-term care. It got a lot of criticism because it's a small amount of coverage, but that small amount of coverage is meaningful coverage for the people who need it and can use it and are contributing to the cost of providing that kind of care. It is not meant to be the answer to long-term care financing, but it is a beginning. It is a way to look at ways in which we could, as a country, find a way to finance this kind of care. I doubt there's a single way to do this. I think there will be a lot of experimentation in states to figure out ways to do this. The expansion of Medicaid that had been happening was one way of looking at this, and perhaps even giving an opportunity in some states for people to have bought into that program or to have a small co-payment in order to be covered by a system like that. But the truth of the matter is the people in the middle have no option. They can't afford long-term care insurance in the first place. They certainly can't afford it if it goes up over time after they've retired. The people on the lower end who are poor already are going to be relying on whatever public resources there are. And the people at the top end who have money are going to use what they have until it's gone.
What's great about the Washington plan, which is the only plan that is actually operating right now,
Yes.
is that it is funded through a payroll tax, similar to Social Security and Medicare. There are some other states that are considering, I think California, New York. Are there any other states, Connie?
New York has introduced a bill to do a similar program now for the last 3 or 4 years. That has been unsuccessful. And California had a task force that developed 5 options for our state legislature that have since been sitting in the legislature for the last few years. There are other states around the country that have explored this idea in a couple of different ways, but none of them have come to any kind of fruition yet. So there are 17 states that have done something around planning for long-term care, called a master plan on aging. So states understand the problem of a growing population of people needing care. States are not unaware of this. They know through their Medicaid program that this is coming. What they don't know is what to do about it. And so there are a lot of different proposals out there, a lot of different ideas. There can be a way to do this, as you suggest, a universal way to create a basic public program that people who could afford it could add on to it with supplemental insurance, similar to what we do with Medicare now. So there are options out there. They just have not yet come to any kind of a conclusion outside of what Washington has done, which is a really interesting proposition and one I think we're all going to be following.
So just to add a thought to that, in that surveys of consumers show that they think the government should help with this. They think the government, whatever they think that means, maybe they're thinking Medicare, but also our politics are changing. So I don't know what a survey today would say about what the role of government should be. But before we move off this slide, there's a couple of things here we didn't talk about. So one is SHIP resources, and another is the role of insurance departments in terms of providing resources for consumers trying to figure this out. So,
Bonnie, why don't you take SHIP and I'll take regulators?
You all have a state SHIP program, and that program, as part of its contract, is supposed to help with information about long-term care. They can be a resource to state regulators. On the other hand, state regulators can be a huge resource to their own state, because your state agency on aging might be exploring ways to finance long-term care and not talking to the Department of Insurance that has the actuarial experience to know something about this. So the state agencies can help each other in looking at this particular problem and how to solve it. The SHIPs are there to help consumers understand some of these issues and to help them if they're trying to figure out what to do about long-term care insurance in their state.
One of the things that regulators can do is to make sure that the licensed insurance agents really understand the issues and understand the various products that are available. There's really a communication gap here. Most of us have cognitive dissonance around, will I need long-term care? No, I don't think that that's going to happen. Agents don't necessarily focus on this with their clients. Financial planners also Some are very aware and talk about it, but in my experience, most don't. So it's a communication problem. We've got to get an understanding amongst whether it's middle class, upper class, lower class. Everyone needs to understand the basic problems, and then with their planner, with their insurance agent, with their friends and colleagues, talk about the ways that are important to them to be looking forward and manage this issue. One thing that I would recommend to all of you just as individuals is be talking about these issues with your family, your spouses, especially your kids. If you've got parents, especially with them. What are the intentions? What are their plans? What are the possibilities? What are the resources? Having that discussion and having people say, when I get to a certain point, and have them actually say what that point would be, that's where I recognize I'm going to need help. I didn't do that with my father, and he lived independently far too long, and it shortened his life. So having that intergenerational conversation's really important.
And I would add the question, what do you expect?
Absolutely.
Because that's where there might be, as you know, more variation than you might think in terms of what is expected. I'm surprised that the younger people in my family have said, spend all your money, don't worry about us, we're good. Which, you know, is a very relieving sort of thing to hear that.
That's a good point, Bonnie.
So, and I might have thought, oh, they're counting on me to you know, to leave something to them. I want to take this moment just to mention that in the application in the app, there are attachments, and one of which is a list of resources that we put together on a variety of topics. So if there's something you'd like to follow up on, there's more information there. We've talked about a lot of the things on the state side, but not really mentioned anything happening at the federal level. But Bonnie, is there anything more you want to say about the state activity, or just talk about federal at this point?
Well, at the federal level, that's a bit of a dilemma because so many things are being cut that are critical to this. There is, one piece of legislation that's been introduced that would create a long-term care insurance program, but that design has a waiting period based on income. And unfortunately, that once again, would disadvantage a lot of the people who are in the middle, who have some resources when they retire, those are the ones that are at risk of being spent in order to meet that kind of a deductible. So one of the things I wanted to say about this is that this is not an inexpensive issue. Long-term care is not inexpensive. It costs money. There isn't an inexpensive way to do this. There's a way to look at this in segments. There's a way to look at this in priorities, but this is going to cost money for the people who need this kind of care. And that's the dilemma that we face, is how to do this for a burgeoning number of older people.
And also recognizing that unpaid care also has a cost. We might not monetize it, but long-term care is expensive in either time or money or both. So, and we mentioned, I mean, there are clearly ways to approach this at the federal level, and they do continue to be proposed, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of oxygen in the room right now to deal with this at the federal level.
This is not new. Congress has been avoiding this issue since the baby boomers were young adults. And people have known that this was coming, they just have refused to deal with it. And now it is being compounded because of two things: longevity, because people are living much longer or taking longer to die, as Dick said, which happens to a lot of people. And we have larger populations underneath that baby boomer population that are also experiencing longevity and are going to move into this age range in the not too distant future.
So we want to wind up this part, so there'll be some time for questions, but many of you in this room are parts of state insurance departments. You don't all have regulatory authority in your role, but you work with people who do. So in what ways can state insurance regulators be a resource?
Well, I think state regulators can be a resource to their departments of aging. In about 2/3 of the country, the SHIP program is in a Department of Aging or similar department of state government. They need the experience and the materials and information from departments of insurance. In 1/3 of the programs are in departments of insurance. Those programs need the experience, materials, and information from their aging departments, because those things are all part of this issue of helping people understand issues around insurance who are in older age ranges or moving into them very soon. The SHIP programs have the ability to help people understand these issues as well, and they do in the States a lot of counseling on that particular issue. So I think these departments of state government can be resources for each other, and they sometimes don't have that kind of relationship within a state. So I would encourage states to make those connections and get that kind of work done between state agencies.
I agree.
Let's stop and see if we have any questions from the people in the room or via chat. And we have
Wait for the microphone.
Jacob, who's going to race around the room with the microphone.
I have a question. Considering this big bubble of need, could it come to the point where it becomes a health crisis and it's more like an emergency kind of funding, where like a pandemic or something like that? If it comes to the point where nobody is prepared for this thing and all of a sudden it just balloons and blows up?
Very interesting question. Bonnie, what are your thoughts about that?
I actually have no idea about how this is going to happen in the future with the kinds of decisions that we're making about funding for people who need help now just for health services. The moves that Medicaid have been making towards home and community-based care have been really good decisions to keep people out of institutions that are far more expensive in the first place and don't deliver the kind of care that people really need. People want to be in their homes. Families want people to stay in their homes, and they can get the least expensive kind of care in their homes, but often there's no way to pay for it. And unless we find a way to do that, then that probably isn't going to be happening.
And I would just add that many people's homes really won't allow them to stay in their homes. They're not designed to be lived in by someone who has mobility issues or other care issues. Do you have any other questions? Realizing that none of us can actually see you, so like...
Hi there, Washington. So we just went through the Walk Cares implementation. We're starting to tackle the issue of portability. Most people, Washington is a high cost of living state. If they're retiring in Washington state, their funds go a lot less far. If there is no federal leadership on this, and we do end up with 40 states trying 40 flavors of some sort of fund, how do we logistically manage people moving across states? I mean, the amount of movement we'll potentially see, that's a real problem that probably doesn't have an answer, but it's definitely something to think about, how we would tackle 50 systems and 50 sets of potential portability.
Model regulation.
Yeah, that's a great observation and a really, I think, critical reason we all are part of NAIC because we understand the role of some uniformity across states, and this just highlights the value of that, I would say. Are we out of time, Randy?
We are,
Shoot.
yeah, we are out of time. Thank you very much. You've really provoked some thought here, I think. It's kind of scared us into thinking of the future, so that's always a good thing. So I want to thank our panelists.